you got to remember that music in its essence is sound. It's not pushing down the keys. It's not all the mechanical things you have to do. You have to do those mechanical things, but then be sure that you actually listen to what you're doing.
Welcome everyone to another installment of Meet the Members interview. Today's guest is Candy Steen. Welcome, Candy, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored that you asked.
So let's get to know a little bit about your story, Candy. Could you share a little bit about how you got into music, specifically sacred music and playing the organ?
Sure. I was a pianist for many years, and I actually got a college degree is a Bachelor of Arts in piano performance. And I don't remember ever thinking about wanting to play the organ until later on, when I was just about ready to graduate. All of a sudden, I started thinking, okay, I've got this wonderful degree. Now, how am I going to make some money with it and stuff? So, and then right about then, one time I was listening in a studio class at school. I went to Douglas College. And well, I actually started in another college, but I ended up in Douglas. And I heard a student play the Franck A minor chorale. And I thought, I want to learn how to play the organ. So, and then I was also thinking that playing the organ would give me some more opportunities to earn some money in music. So I did that. So what happened is that right after I graduated, I started organ lessons with Samuel Walter. And I also was taking some education courses, some summer school education courses down at Douglas. But then when the summer school session ended, we moved up to northern New Jersey. I was married by this point, and we moved up to northern New Jersey. So that was the end of my organ lessons. I had like about 2 months worth of organ lessons. For many years, that's all I had. I did the rest of my learning on my own, and I actually took, I had a couple of church jobs, small churches and all. But then I took a few years off when my children were very small. And then when my youngest child started preschool, then I took the job in the Midland Park Christian Reformed Church, and I'm still there 47 years later, believe it or not. One of the things that really was influential in my life is that even though I only had so few organ lessons at the beginning, when my youngest child went off to college, I decided to go back to graduate school and get a degree in organ performance. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. I enrolled at Montclair State College, and I studied with John Gillick, and he was just a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And it was just a great experience being there. I learned so much. I went part-time. I didn't take a lot of, I didn't try to get done fast. In fact, I tried to extend it as much as possible because I loved it. So I would just take one course and then the organ lessons. And I had to travel into New York City for the organ lessons. So that was a broadening of my life too, to become kind of a New York commuter. I had never done all that much and stuff. So anyway, it was a very meaningful part of my life. And I met friends there. I met Peggy Shaw and also Mary Lou Stevens. And we became she's in the Metropolitan chapter. But anyway, we became friends, and we became friends with John Gillick. And it was just really a great time in my life.
Oh, that's marvelous. Thank you for sharing. And congrats on the tenure at Midland Reformed. That's wonderful. Yeah,
that's crazy, isn't it?
Inspiring for sure. So if you could share also some of your proudest moments or some highlights from your work in sacred music.
Well, I would say that I having gone to graduate school, I had the opportunity to play a lot of other organs besides the one that I'm playing. And in fact, it was John Gillick actually suggested it at first when he realized that I was sort of married to the organ that I was playing all the time. He says, you really need to get some experience on some other organs. So what I did was I signed up to do some substituting. And at the time, the church job that I had we had both a morning service and an evening service. And there was an associate organist too. And we would switch. One week I would play in the morning and she would play in the evening. And then the next week it was just the opposite. So there were some Sunday mornings that I was available to play in other churches. So I started doing that, and I started playing in, lots of different churches around here. And some of the ones that I really liked the best were like Emmanuel Baptist, and I did Second Reformed Church in Hackensack. Those were some of the really, the most fun churches. But I played in lots of different churches. And then also, as I finished my degree at Montclair, one of the things I decided to play I learned was the Duraflay Prelude and Fugue on a Lamb. I love that piece, absolutely love it. But when I was finished learning it, then John Gillick said to me, well, now we got to find a place for you to play this, because the organ that I play on is a Baroque organ. It's not suitable for Duraflay. There's no way I was going to ever play that in my church, but so anyway, so he arranged for me to give a recital at St. John the Divine in New York City. And it was one of those where they had a little mini recitals, like a half-hour recital after the evening services. And so I played one of those, and it was really a thrill to be there. I mean, I worked like a dog to do that, and it was also kind of interesting because this was way back we're talking about like 1990, and the church, that was before their fire, and the church had no memory levels. It was just, it was very, very different. And then it had some problems. And right before I'm ready to give the recital, all of a sudden something went askew on the pistons or something like that, and they weren't working. Well, I was nearly beside myself. And John Gillick was so wonderful. He stood by, he says, now you don't worry about it. And so he stood there and he did all my registering for me, because I couldn't do it, and when you play Duraflay, there are lots of times pushing pistons. So he did all of that. He saved me through that. But anyway, but that was a fun time.
Oh, wow. What a story. That's great.
I also did a couple of recitals at St. Peter's Church in Lutheran Church in New York City, which was a real fun experience on their Kleist organ. And I also did, I was able to do a couple of noontime recitals, believe it or not, at the First Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. It was kind of funny how that all started. Was my husband had business clients out there, and so I would go with him like once a year in January sometime. We would go out there, and he would make his calls and I would be on my own. Well, it just so happens that a friend of a friend, was the organist at the First Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. And they had daily, little organ recitals, like at, 12 o'clock noon. And so he arranged that I played a couple of those, 1 year, and the next year I did another one or something like that. So it was a fun time. It was a fun thing to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. So going on to the next question, do you have a favorite composer or era of music? And if so, why do you prefer them or that era?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's so many wonderful pieces of eras and so much different wonderful music. Of course, Bach is wonderful, but I guess to answer that question honestly, I would have to say that French impressionistic types era is what I really like. I'm thinking about the romantic. I think about how I heard that girl play Franck, and that's what made me want to play the organ. And then also like this Duraflay that I worked on, and I don't even remember why I picked that, but I obviously picked it because I just love the piece. And I wish composers like Debussy and Ravel and Fauré had written more stuff for the organ, but I absolutely love the Fauré Requiem. It like speaks to my soul. In fact, it's kind of interesting. About 10 years ago, I had to spend a few days in the hospital. And in preparation for that, we weren't allowed in those days to bring a cell phone into the hospital, but I had an iPod. And so I put some music on it. And I thought afterwards, I'm sure this is the oddest group of music that on an iPod that anybody else has ever had, because I put on it a Bach Brandenburg Concerto, and I had the Fauré Requiem. I remember those two that I put on my iPad to listen to. But so I guess that would be my favorite era, is the late French Romantic.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, what brought you to the AGO, and what have you gleaned from being a member and leader in the chapter?
I don't remember exactly. I would think that when I started at the Midland Park Church, there was a woman who was the member of the church who was an organist professionally outside the church by the name of Wilma Skipper. I think Gloria Norton mentioned her too. And I think she probably talked me into joining the AGO, but I wasn't very active for years. I was just kind of on the sidelines and stuff for whatever reason. And then somehow, I don't know, I started getting more active. And the first thing I did was I became chair of what they call the SOS committee, which I don't think is intact anymore, but it was called the Student Organist Search Committee. And what happened is we were trying to encourage more young people to go into playing the organ. So we would hold Saturday morning workshops and demonstrations and that stuff. And we also had even a small, somebody had donated some money, and we had a small scholarship fund where we would help pay for organ lessons for beginning organists and stuff. So that was my first job in the leadership in the chapter. And then I don't know, maybe around 1990 or so, the woman who had been the treasurer of our chapter moved out of the area, and they needed another treasurer. So actually, I took over that job. And so I did that for like 10 or 15 years. I was the treasurer. But then I found out kind of after I agreed to be the treasurer that also meant that I had to be the treasurer of the Rodland Scholarship Fund.
Oh.
And so that made me, I was on that board then too. So I got very involved in that. And it was really great because one of the things that we did with the Rodland Scholarship Fund was that we had these hymn festivals in the summertime. We had these hymn festivals in the spring, and they were really wonderful. It's not only did we introduce the winner of the scholarship, but we also had like a big festival where there were people from the surrounding area congregation would come, and then we would sing hymns. And one of my favorite things about this was that they had a big mass choir. So we would all gather together with our choirs and stuff, and we'd sing. And we would be able to sing some of the big, wonderful choir works that normally churches can't do. I think about something like the Last Words of David, the Randall Thompson. Oh, those times were wonderful. I really loved those. Oh, and also speaking of the scholarship fund, Gloria Norton was always in charge of that, pretty much of that scholarship, and she would do all the auditions and stuff. But she needed a lot of help in doing preliminary judging, so I would do. A lot of times I would help with preliminary judging and stuff with that. So
yeah,
that's about it.
That's about it. That's a lot. That's wonderful. And going back to a question, we're doing them out of order, but if you could offer advice to organists starting out in their career, what would you share?
Well, I would say be sure you listen to yourself when you're playing. And in order to play, we have to push down keys with our fingers and with our feet, and we have to count, and we have to push pistons, and we have to register. We have to do a lot of things. But I found personally that sometimes you can get lost in those things. You got to remember that music in its essence is sound. It's not pushing down the keys. It's not all the mechanical things you have to do. You have to do those mechanical things, but then be sure that you actually listen to what you're doing. And I know personally, I used to be so conscientious about making sure I played every note. And then sometimes when you get to a hard part, you kind of tense up, and then all of a sudden, and you lose sight of what the music is. And at least I found that. And I found that, I think it's better to listen to the music, even if you have to cheat a little bit on some of the notes. Like, if you want to, if you have a certain hard spot that's giving you a lot of problems, maybe leave out a few notes in the left, say in the left hand or something like that. I'll give you an example of that. It's this Sunday I'm planning to play as a postlude, a toccata on in the Cross of Christ I Glory by David Sherwin. And it's basically, the melody is virtually always in the pedal. So that's the important part. And the right, both hands are just doing, toccata type stuff, 16th notes just over and over again. And, typical of that. And there's this one place that I found that it's quite hard. For one thing, the pedals are double at this point. You got to play both feet. And unfortunately, it happens right after you have to turn a page too. So it's just like double things. And then all of us, I found that this one measure was giving me problems. So what I decided to do is I just realized that the right hand was both hands were, like I say, just, playing these chords, the 16th notes. And I found that if I just repeated instead of changing, from the first inversion to the regular thing of the chord, just change it a little bit. Nobody's going to know. And I just realized that it's so much more important to get the overall effect rather than, to worry about every single little note that's giving you a problem. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, especially for Bach. You don't change that. But there are certain other composers you can change it without it being a problem.
Right. So keep the priorities.
Yes, think about and listen to yourself. And of course, it's always good to record yourself, if you wanted to be sure what it sounds like. And that's so easy to do with cell phones now. It used to be a lot bigger job to record yourself. But even if you just think about listening rather than getting too tied up in the notes.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're
and
welcome.
Could you briefly describe the instrument? You've mentioned it already at Midland, but the instrument that you have at your church, maybe some of its history.
Yes, it is. This instrument is a Baroque instrument that was put in 1970. And it was built by the Pels and Van Leeuwen Company in the Netherlands. And I don't think they're even in business anymore. But I don't know how much you know about this, but in the 60s, it was a big rage in the organ world, and actually in the music world. They were really anti-romantic music, and everything was the high ideal was the Baroque. And so we had all these with the high mixtures and all this stuff, and kind of lacking in the 8-foot stops and stuff. So this is a Baroque instrument, and it was it was put in during that time. I would love it if it were a little more lush and if we had a little more 8-foot things. But other than that, it is a nice instrument, and I have enjoyed playing it. It's kind of interesting. It's only a 2-manual instrument, but it does have, I've forgotten how many stops, how many ranks of pipes are, more than you would think, because there's no unification or anything on this. Every pipe is its own. So it's so, like I said, it's a nice instrument to play. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? Oh, another interesting thing about it was that it's really a kind of a hybrid. It's sort of built like a tracker action, but does have magnetic pull down. So it isn't really a tracker, but it does have the chests and stuff. But it's kind of interesting. We had trouble after about 25 years. All of a sudden, the organ I'd be in the middle of a service, and all of a sudden the pitch would start going down, down, down. And then all of a sudden it would just quit playing completely. Well, come to find out that they had built this with some kind of a vacuum system, it was an experiment at the time. And I don't understand it very well myself, but what happened was they developed some kind of a leak in this thing. And with a vacuum system, system, you can't find where this leak is, because it's not like where you're blowing it and then you feel, oh, here's where the air is coming out. But it was kind of interesting. We did some research on it, found out that Pelson van Leeuwen had only built about 5 organs using this system, and then they decided it wasn't a good idea. Well, so then what we ended up having to do, which actually in the long run worked out very well, actually, was we had Jim Conselman, who I, by the way, I think he's just wonderful. He came in and he basically changed the whole system into a more conventional, way of running it. And although it didn't really change any of the stops or anything, it put in the different system, so it was much more usable. And also, up until then, I only had 4 general pistons, and they all had to be set with using this little board, as by manual. It was really awful. But anyway, when he came in, then he put in the solid state, and so we have memory levels, and we have lots. I have 14 general pistons now, and all that kind of stuff. So it worked out much better. It was interesting because the minister at the time, this was going to be a pretty expensive procedure, and he was able to convince some elderly woman who was, nearing the end of her life to finance this project, and which was great. But then we thought, when the congregation isn't, the problem is they're not going to hear any difference. It's in the scenes. It isn't like it's going to sound. So we did put in a Zimbelstern. So that was the one thing that they could really see that, oh, this was an addition to the organ.
That's great. That's great. All right. And then do you have anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers or with the AGO chapter?
Well, I do have a couple of fun stories that I think that I'd like to tell you about. One of them has to do with a church organ that I just was able to play just for a few minutes. What was interesting, when I was at Douglas, like I said, my piano teacher was Thomas Richner, and he was also an organist, and he was the organist at the big Christian Science Mother Church up in Boston. And anyway, so about 10 years after I had graduated from college, I went to hear one of his recitals. And I talked to him afterwards, and I said to him, we have friends who live in the Boston area. We are going to go up to Boston on such and such a date, and we are going to come and go to your morning church service at the Mother Church. And he says, oh, wow, that's great. He says, bring your organ shoes and stuff. He says, I'll let you try out the organ. So I thought, okay. So anyway, so the day arrives. So we went to the service, and after the service, I went down to the organ console, and I said, I reminded him, and he says, oh, I'm really sorry. He says, I can't let you do it. He says, they're doing a tour of the building. They had a tour group that's going. They have a leader who they're doing a tour group of the building, and so I can't let you play the organ. So I guess he must have just seen disappointment on my face. So, but then he said, oh, well, just come in and play something soft and stuff. So I had brought my shoes, and I brought the Vita Toccata, but anyway, so we went into the vault, and I don't know if you know the Mother Church, but when you go into the organ console there, it's like going into a vault, really. I remember having to duck to get into it. And once you get down there, you absolutely cannot see anything that's going on in the sanctuary. So we went down there, and anyway, he gave me, I don't remember what I played. He played me something, gave me some music, some soft music, and I played it. And he went out into the sanctuary. And then a little while later, he came back and he says, oh, go ahead, play the Vita. So I did. And so he did all the registering for it, all the registration and stuff. So I just played away. Well, I found out afterwards from my husband, who had been outside, what had happened out there, because I didn't know at the time. Well, what happened when I started playing softly and then he went out there, apparently the people were in there taking this tour, and the guide wanted to take them out of the sanctuary and go into other parts of the building. I mean, they have a big planetarium, all sorts of stuff. And the people didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay to hear the organ.
And so you were the organist that they heard. That's awesome.
I was. And then another funny experience I had, as I told you that I had played uh, a couple of recitals in this church in Los Angeles. Well, as you can imagine, with such a huge organ, I had to do a great deal of practice ahead of time, and which was okay. My husband was out making business calls. I had nothing else to do. I just spent hours. I would go there and spend the whole day practicing. But one day I went there to practice and they told me, well, you're going to have to stop at such and such a time because we have a wedding. And I said, oh, okay. So anyway, the time came for the wedding. And so the organist, who I didn't know it was somebody, it was not the regular organist, but he came out there and he sat down at the console and about, 4 or 5 people were sitting around him and stuff. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, I think I'm going to just sit in some obscure place in the church and just listen to this, to this wedding, watch this wedding and so. And so I did. So anyway, the organist played. It was magnificent. It was, it was just great. And when it was time for the bride to come down the aisle, they put the state trumpets on. I mean, it was like the Queen of England was getting married or something like that. It was a magnificent thing. There was nobody in the pews.
Oh.
I was the only person sitting in the pews. I thought this was so bizarre. Well, what I found out afterwards is this was just a photo op. People do this, and I guess the church makes a good deal of money by doing this, by making their space. I mean, it looks like a cathedral. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous building and everything, and of course the organ is wonderful. And a video, I guess they must have done a video too, because otherwise, why would you bother with the organ? But anyway, I just thought it was just so odd. In fact, they didn't even have any a maid of honor or anything. When the bride had to give away her to give her flowers, she had to use the wedding coordinator from the church. So I just thought that was a funny story.
Yeah, it's like a precursor to COVID times or something like that. We're playing to empty buildings, empty cathedrals. Oh gosh. Wow.
Oh,
No, those are great stories. Yeah, thanks for sharing and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Well, you're welcome. It was nice to be here. Thank you for talking with me.
And I'll see you at the next meeting.
Yeah, whenever that is, right.
All right, take care.
Thank you. You too.